Anytime that I hear anybody ever second guessing whether or not they're going to be a caregiver, I say, do it. You're never, ever, ever going to regret doing it.
My guest today is Michelle Lee Clark, a community member living in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Her father, Billy Clark, was diagnosed with PSP at age 91, and Michelle became his primary caregiver during the final 9 months of his life. This is her story about love, loss, and the remarkable changes that come from life's hardest moments. October 2019. Michelle's father was 89 and walked 3 to 4 miles every single day. A sharp dresser, Michelle says she still has probably 50 of his suits from the 40s and 50s. He was an Air Force veteran who grew up on a tobacco farm in a small North Carolina town, someone who was active and fiercely independent. And then, in their split-level house in Fayetteville, he made a sharp turn at the top of the stairs.
He made a sharp turn, fell down the stairs, and broke his pelvis in 5 places. And he was life flighted from Fayetteville to UNC Chapel Hill.
Surgery at 89 is risky, but he made it through. And when it came time to recover, Michelle brought him to live with her in Raleigh. This was in December 2019.
I'm very thankful he was with me during COVID. And he recuperated, and then we got him back up to walking 2 miles a day.
That independent spirit never left him.
He's so independent that he wanted to move back home and live independently. So he moved back to Fayetteville.
But about 6 months later, Michelle and her sister started noticing something about the way he walked. His gait seemed off.
We had an occupational therapist that was working with him, was like, he's showing some signs of Parkinsonism. So like maybe you should see somebody about that.
So they took him to a specialist in Fayetteville.
And they immediately said, okay, he's got Parkinson's and here's the medicine and go about your way.
Michelle wasn't accepting that. She reached out to friends and got an appointment at Duke with a specialist. And this doctor knew immediately.
And he even said to me afterwards, as soon as I walked in and saw your dad and saw him looking at me, I could tell because of his eyes and the non-blinking. And then when he started walking and the gait and things like that. But then he looked at his MRI and he's like, yeah, this is a very, very rare form of Parkinson's called progressive supranuclear palsy.
Her father was 91 at diagnosis, older than most people who develop PSP. And the first thing he asked,
are my kids going to get this? Like, is it hereditary?
The Duke specialist was thorough and compassionate, sitting with them for an hour.
And said, this is everything that you can expect. This is how you probably need to plan for the future. And everything is faster than it would normally be.
They kept going back to see him. Michelle would drive down from Raleigh, an hour each way. Her sister would visit when she could. They brought in help from a company called Guardian Angels, caregivers who would come in the morning to help feed him and help him change. But then the falls started multiplying.
The worst one was when I was in Chicago for the marathon, and my sister calls and said, Dad fell and he broke his collarbone. And at that point, we were like, okay, we need some more help.
Her father didn't want to be a burden, so he made a decision.
My dad was like, I don't want to put that burden on you, so I'm going to move into an assisted living facility. They're going to know how to care for me.
Michelle visited all the time, but she started noticing things the staff didn't understand.
They would come in and say, do you want to shower? And he would say no. He meant yes, because the neurological thing was happening. And they would be like, are you hungry? And he would say no. So he would say the opposite of what he meant. And then a lot of times they couldn't understand what he was saying.
Michelle had started recording videos of her father by then, something she didn't get to do with her mother before she passed.
I would just put the camera up and talk to him in bed. And he would say, I just wish I could walk. I wish people could understand me. Nobody understands me. Nobody can understand what I say.
That's when Michelle knew. The staff at the assisted living facility meant well, but they didn't know PSP. They didn't know her father the way she did.
So that turned into the point of me making the decision that me with some help could probably take care of him better than anybody else could. So that's what we did.
Michelle was going to bring her father home. There was just one problem. Michelle's house in Raleigh was a 1950s ranch with narrow doorways that were too small to fit a wheelchair through. If she was going to do this, she needed a different house. So she started looking, and then one weekend, her niece, who's a realtor, sent her a listing.
And she's like, you're in town this weekend, right? And I was like, yeah, I'm coming in. I'll be there like around 11. She's like, oh, there's an open house for this cool house. We should go because I know you like this architecture. And it had 2 kitchens. And I said, why does it have 2 kitchens? And she looked at the MLS. She's like, like, oh my God, it has an in-law suite. And I was like, we're not going to the open house. I will be down there in 2 hours. Book a showing for me because it has an in-law suite. And I walked into the house and I felt my mom because my mom loved mid-century modern. And my dad didn't even hesitate. We bought the house together. And he was the happiest. Like, he's like, when can I get out of here?
Michelle sold her house in Raleigh and moved to Fayetteville alongside her boyfriend at the time.
He was like, I'm coming with you. I'm going to help you take care of your dad. And we got engaged here.
Michelle was lucky. She could work from home, usually from her father's in-law suite. She brought back China, the caregiver from Guardian Angels who'd helped before. But even with support, caregiving was demanding in ways she hadn't expected.
A lot of it is knowing that sometimes people that are coming in to assist you don't understand the disease. So you have to prepare them.
When her father went on hospice care, Michelle found herself constantly educating the staff.
Most of them didn't know what PSP was. And they would say, well, why is he doing this? Or why is he doing that? I'm like, well, that's part of the disease. Like, why does he not blink? Well, that's part of PSP.
And there was another aspect that Michelle hadn't even considered, how this sort of intensive care would affect her own mental health.
One of my tools all of my life for helping with mental health has been running. And then when I started taking care of my dad and moved him in, all of a sudden I couldn't run anymore. That was hard.
She had to find new ways to cope, new tools to deal with the daily challenges of full-time caregiving.
I always tell people it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but I would never not do it. I don't look back on anything that I did and regretted it.
The hardest parts weren't always what you'd expect. It was watching her father struggle with things he desperately wanted to do.
He wanted to walk. He couldn't walk. So I'd get him in his wheelchair and I'd take him for walks around the neighborhood in his wheelchair. But it wasn't the same.
Her father loved to eat, but swallowing became difficult. Walking became impossible. Speaking became a struggle. But his mind stayed sharp.
It's not like they lose everything except their mind, it seems like. He was sharp as a tack.
Michelle had a buzzer system set up. Her father would press it when he needed help.
And it would go off 10 or 12 times a night. And at the time, it was like, oh my God.
She looks back differently now.
I've never done anything in my life or will do anything in my life that will ever equate to being a caregiver. Sometimes I equate it to I've never had kids. So my dad was my little kid that I took care of. And some people don't want to do it because it's hard, but I encourage anybody to do it because it's hard and you learn a lot from it.
Within that struggle, Michelle found something new. She got to know her father in a completely new way.
Just hanging out with him at night and putting him to bed and sitting in bed with him and him telling me stories that I'd never heard before.
Late at night, when neither of them could sleep, they would just talk.
And he would say, I don't know what happened, but something happened in my life where I lost confidence and I didn't do the things that I wanted to do. And he said, Michelle, if I pass on any advice to you, it's do the things that you're scared of doing.
That's when Michelle learned her father had wanted to be an actor in Hollywood. She had no idea. And she saw sides of him she'd never seen before.
All the nurses that came around that were helping. Him flirting and telling jokes and me seeing a side of my dad that I'd never seen before because he was always, not that he was stoic, but I didn't see that side of him. And then I finally got to see that side of him when he was kind of vulnerable, but he inspired me.
Michelle had always been a collector of vintage clothing and furniture. She'd joke with her father about opening a store someday. They'd go through old clothes together, and he'd tell her stories.
I would come home from doing my little vintage hauls and come and show my dad, and he was like, oh, your mom wore something like this. And we would joke about one day I would open a store and he would come and hang out with me.
But PSP doesn't wait. Michelle's father stopped eating. He lived for 3 more weeks. He was almost 93 years old. They'd had 9 months together in that house.
And as tough as it was to lose him, I was glad to not see him suffering because at the end it was really bad.
After her father passed away, Michelle and her husband went back to the tobacco farm where her father grew up. They were looking for his Air Force uniform.
We went, and not only did we find my dad's Air Force uniform, but most of the decor for the store is from the attic that he grew up in, that all his family members just kept putting stuff in. We found Wranglers from the 50s. We found so much stuff.
It was like her father was still helping her build the dream that they had talked about together. 2 weeks after her father passed, Michelle and her now fiancé were driving through Fayetteville when they noticed an empty building.
And we drove by one night and we circled around and said, oh, this building's empty. There wasn't a for lease sign on it or anything. There had been something in there, but it was never open. And I reached out to my friends and I said, who owns this building? And I got in touch with them and I signed a lease the next week, not knowing how to run a business. I feel like my dad gave something to me for giving myself to him, if that makes sense.
The vintage store they dreamed about was actually happening. Michelle filled it with the treasures from her father's family farm. His Air Force uniform, the Wranglers from the 50s, chore jackets that would later attract interest from Japanese buyers.
His photos are all over the store because I've got photos of him and my mom from the 60s and the 70s.
Michelle threw herself into opening the shop, then planning a wedding, then the wedding itself, then the honeymoon, and then
I crashed like hard to the point where I said to my husband, I was like, I might need to go somewhere because I am not dealing, like, all the good things have passed and now I'm sitting in my grief and I don't know how to deal with it.
guilt came flooding in. There was a fall on Thanksgiving weekend after her father moved in with her. She blamed herself.
I kept reliving that fall. It just came up out of nowhere, like almost 8 months later. And I kept blaming myself, saying if I had done this differently, he would still be here.
She started therapy. Slowly, she began to work through it.
My dad was almost 93. Like, most people don't live that long. And I'm sitting here blaming myself for one little small thing.
There was another layer to it too, something Michelle calls caregiver grief.
I spent so long being a caregiver that I didn't identify like with anything that was purposeful in my life anymore, because that was my purpose for so long.
Even the house, the mid-century modern home she'd bought specifically to care for him, became difficult.
I didn't like being in my house because it reminded me of my dad. So I would try to not be in my house. And that doesn't make any sense because I love my house. But it was just because there were so many memories here that I equated to being sad. Now I equate them to being happy.
She's converting her father's in-law suite into an Airbnb, a space celebrating everything her parents loved. At the vintage store, people come in and recognize photos of her father and ask about him. Michelle gets to tell them about him. At the end of this year, Michelle is leaving the job that she's had for 11 years. Her father's advice, do the things that scare you, changed her life. Now she wants to focus on the store and on something else that matters deeply to her, raising awareness about PSP.
So many people don't know about this disease. You hear about, I don't want to say the big marketable ones, but the marketable ones. You know, you wear pink for breast cancer, the ALS because of the ice bucket challenge and so forth. Like, I want to find something for PSP that it becomes a disease that's known so that we can help find a cure for it.
She remembers her father's words on those videos that she recorded.
He was like, I want to raise $40,000. I've got him on videotape saying that. I want to raise $40,000. I want to do whatever I can because I don't want anybody to suffer the way that I'm suffering, because this is not the way that anybody wants to live.
For Michelle, hope means awareness.
Hope to me for PSP is the awareness of the disease, because it's kind of been a silent little partner of Parkinson's and nobody really knows about it.
She thinks about misdiagnosis constantly, how her father's first doctor handed them Parkinson's medication without really looking, how she had to fight for the right diagnosis.
Every time we would have to go to the hospital or a doctor, and I would have to educate them because they didn't know about PSP.
She thinks about Linda Ronstadt, the singer her father loved, who also has PSP.
Anytime you ever Google Linda Ronstadt disease, because people want to know why she doesn't sing, it doesn't come back as PSP. It comes back as Parkinson's. That's another thing that I want to change.
For other caregivers who might be listening, people trying to decide whether they can take this on, Michelle has clear advice.
I say, do it. I don't care like how hard it is or the issues that you go through. At the end of the day, you're never, ever, ever going to regret doing it.
She's realistic about the challenges. Ask for help. Don't try to do everything yourself like she did.
I wanted to do everything myself. I thought that I was the only person that could take care of my dad. I think a lot of it is making sure that you ask people for help.
And be aware of how it will affect your mental health.
Going into being a full-time caregiver, knowing how much it's going to take a toll on you, yourself, and your mental health, that's something that everybody should know.
If your loved one was a veteran, she says, learn how to navigate the VA system. It made a real difference for her family. Looking back now, Michelle sees the whole journey differently. Yes, the buzzer going off 10 or 12 times a night was exhausting. Yes, she lost her primary way of coping. Yes, it was the hardest thing she's ever done. But she also got those late night conversations, the stories she never heard, and the advice that's still shaping her future. A side of her father that she hadn't seen before.
And then I finally got to see that side of him when he was kind of vulnerable, but he inspired me.
9 months. That's what they had together in that house. 9 months of wheelchair walks around the neighborhood. 9 months of vintage store dreams. 9 months of learning who her father really was.
I've never done anything in my life or will do anything in my life that will ever equate to being a caregiver. It's like, the best thing I ever did.
Her father's legacy lives on in the vintage store filled with his family's treasures, in the Airbnb she's creating in his suite, in the awareness she's working to build around PSP, and in Michelle herself, doing the things that scare her, just like he told her to.
And I'm thankful for all of that.